We're going to start with part 2 now, and we'll go
Yes.
as long as you have time. Okay. Hi
Okay.
again. So,
Hi.
hi. We'll just keep going.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. Just keep going.
Just keep going. I will
Yeah.
straight away share my screen so that you can see something. I want to
Fantastic.
share this screen.
Of course, he talks about the subject matter that we're about to explore further in man's supreme inheritance in relation to the person who is lifting the paper, who goes to lift the paper mache weight. But then there's a few places where he comes back to it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So for the moment, it's once again, it's man's supreme inheritance, and it's the very beginning of the book, and he is just presenting the different misconception people have, and so there is a few very bad organization of the mind. One is suggestion. So he's very against suggestion. He says suggestion is like awful. I can't remember the exact word at the moment. It's I feel free. My neck is free. My back is lengthening and widening. And if you continue thinking that someday, somehow, it will happen. I've never seen it happen in that way. Yeah.
I
In
did. I
conscious
did
guidance
lose
and
a
control, it's very
lose
difficult.
a. I did lose a few years of my life and a bit of money
Yeah.
on suggestion.
Yes, it's and so there is this one suggestion, and then there is also relaxation. So
Mm,
that's his next instance. That's what
yeah,
he's
yeah.
talking about. You think you should be very very careful about. So my next instance, namely relaxation, is even less efficient than physical culture and muscle tensing exercises. So the Alexander technique is nothing like physical culture or muscle tensing exercises because you have to organize decisions of movements synchronously at the same time. Yes, it's thinking in activity. That's what it's John Dewey called the Alexander technique thinking in
Mm,
activity. Why? Because it was about, in fact, thinking decision, a series of decisions at the same time, and then checking objectively to see if the gesture, in fact, was exact reproduction of the intention or not. Okay,
mm,
good. So what is relaxation? The usual procedure is to instruct the pupil with either sitting or lying down on the floor, on the table, to relax or to do what he or she understands as relaxing. And the result is invariably collapse. Well, that is very, very true in itself, and most Alexander teachers know that. And when they have a person lie on the floor or lie on a table, they say it is not relaxation. They say it's release. So there is two words. What is the difference between release
oh,
and relaxation? It's very, very difficult to answer that. It's much better to come back to see what is real relaxation. But we said there are correct coordinations. They are not correct position, but they are correct coordination. So what is the correct coordination then for Alexander?
mm,
That's what he explains here. Uh, for relaxation really means, so that's if ideal relaxation
mm,
really means a due tension of the parts of the organ of the muscular system intended by nature to be constantly more or less tensed, together with a relaxation of those parts intended by nature to be more or less relaxed. A condition which is readily secured in practice by adopting what I call, in my other writings, the geometry, the position of mechanical advantage.
mm,
Okay,
mm,
so that is very very important, and I've set in highlighted the parts of the sentence I want to talk about because well, for the simple reason that I never had an explanation of that sentence by my teachers. It's very interesting. You go to your teacher and you say, what are the parts of the muscular system which have been intended by nature to be constantly more or less tensed? you will hear a big silence. Tension is no good. Tension is the problem. People say that if the person is collapsing the torso and protruding the abdomen forward, it's because there is an undue tension in the legs. And by that, they mean that these parts are shortened, are too active. That's the view of the modern Alexander technique, and I must talk about it because the modern Alexander technique uses the same book as I do. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
different reading,
but it's important to to spot where there are problems, where we need to explain, or if we can't, then we need to study some more. It's not possible to just have your authority of a teacher and say it's like this because that's how I feel it. That's an opinion. So Alexander is not dealing with an opinion here. So we need to be able to answer that. What are the parts of the muscular mechanism intended by nature to be constantly more or less tensed? Yeah. So in order to answer that, there is a first problem that we need to solve. Is that what Alexander means by muscular system? Because most people, when they hear that sentence, they think muscles. They have this idea of muscle. Alexander was not an anatomist. He was not a physiologist, and he was a sort of biomechanician, but not academic. So you have to understand that his vision of the muscular system is very general. It's what's inside the flesh. That's what he's talking about. He's not clear about which are the forces we are recruiting, which are the forces we don't want to recruit when we make decisions of movements. And so it's even not clear in his books how he views movements of parts. Because sometimes he's talking even of coordination of parts. Well, if you...
Well, in regards to the middle paragraph here, because he's giving it a real context. He's saying in the context of bringing about the geometry or the position of mechanical advantage, it's about, together with the relaxation of those parts intended by nature to be more or less relaxed, and those parts that are intended by nature to be constantly more or less tense within a real context. Is that correct?
But yes. Still, there is no definition in his books about what he calls a muscular system. A system is a global envelope, and you can put anything you want in it or not, or you can subtract or add things. It's very, very important because we are rational people and we are professional to understand what we mean by that. Okay?
Yes.
So the first thing to notice is that, of course, muscles play a part. Yeah. But we have a very, very rigid conception about what we call muscles. So it's very clear, first of all, that nowadays we don't talk so much in biomechanics about muscle. We talk about MTU, muscle tendon unit. So that's a difference. First of all, there is a difference. Suddenly there is a word that comes in and it's tendon. Okay? And so you know that the muscle can only transmit forces to the segmental system through the tendons. Okay? Tendons. So there is another word that comes to mind immediately. Ligament. Okay?
Yeah.
And then if you expand a little more and you open any anatomy book, you will certainly see. Or if you cut I don't want to offend you, but if you do eat chickens, if you open the chickens, you will see that, of course, there are muscles that you eat, but there are other structures that you don't. Okay? And these are
fascia.
And fascia. Okay? Very recently, an Alexander teacher, I scrutinize what people are saying, and he said that fascias have no real import to us because they produce very little force. What an extraordinary statement to make. Because nowadays we have internet. So it's so easy to collect scientific articles. And suddenly you think, well, this Alexander teacher is saying that ligaments have no import for coordination, for motor control. But
ligament or fascia, which one?
Okay, that's a good question. So you need to have an idea in your mind of what we call fascia, ligament, tendons, and so. Okay, so fascia is the word that is the global word into which we are going to. So what is fascia? Well, aponeurosis is fascia, ligaments is fascia, tendon is fascia, everything is fascia. Yeah.
And it goes through the organs as well.
And also there are sheaths that are going inside the muscle and around the muscles. Yes, and they have a function. So that is very interesting compared to what this teacher was saying, that there are no import, and their function is to transmit forces. Yeah. To transmit pulls. So there are differences. Because they are all made of an elastic material called collagen. And collagen is elastic, viscoelastic, we call it. And so they transmit forces from the muscle to the bones, but also from the bones to the bones. And from the bones to the muscles. Yes. So you will start to see where I'm going, which means that these structures inside our cells are made for transmitting forces. And of course, when you organize movements, well, what you want is to create what Alexander called a position of mechanical advantage. So there are no correct position, there are correct coordination. So if you coordinate different movement, you have the capacity to change the condition of the fascia. Okay, I will explain this because it's so important that you need to see an example. So for example, now you're seeing a leg seen from the side. Do you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the color are a bit approximative, but what is important is the size, the anchoring, and also the function. So what you see is at the top is the pelvis seen from the side. So you see the front of the pelvis, and the front of the pelvis you have a sort of a reddish thing, a reddish tissue. That's a muscle. That's the muscle.
ITB.
Yes, that muscle is the tensor of the fascia lata. Okay, so when we say tensor of the fascia lata, what we mean is tensor means the muscle, so it's the red thing. And so you know that a muscle has got tendons. So where are the tendons of that muscle? Everywhere around it. Yes? It's got an enormous system of tendons. The tendons is 6 times bigger than the muscle itself, which is it's quite interesting to see this, to see what is the important thing here. Is it the small little band of muscle or the enormous largest band that we see here? That's a fascia, okay? And I will explain that this fascia is not exactly how it looks here, because in fact here we have the impression to see only a band. Yes, but you have to understand that it's not only a band, it's also a sheath. All the muscles of the thigh are enclosed, encapsulated. In a sheath. Yeah, sheath. I don't know how to pronounce that word. It's too complex.
No, it's perfect. No, it's fine.
Okay, good. So you understand, I mean a tube. Okay, so this, when you think about what the other teacher was saying, that it's not very important for motor control because it doesn't transmit forces, it's quite interesting to, read a little bit of the scientific papers on these systems. Where It's part of the muscular system in general. Yeah. And this is as strong as steel. Very interesting. And 17 times more elastic than steel at the same time.
Wow.
Okay,
wow.
But there is a slight problem, and I will concur with my friend, the Alexander teacher, that said that it was not important. Is that, yes, you have to understand something, is that these systems are called passive. All the tendons, the ligaments cannot contract by themselves. Okay, so if by habit you tend to have a protruding abdomen, you remember what was happening to the pelvis? It was rotating forward and down. Yeah. So that the distance between what is at the top of our structure here and the side of the knee would get shorter. You know, it would get shorter, and then, yes, that enormous band, as strong as steel, would be for nothing. Because a ligament only works if you extend it. If you create movements of the different parts that are lengthening the structure, it's only work under tensional force. If you don't create tensional force, that piece of equipment is for nothing. You could have bed cut pieces in it, it doesn't matter. Yeah, you're not using. In most people, when they are standing, they stand with an aggravated lordotic posture. With a lordotic posture, that system doesn't work at all.
So the front of the pelvis is much more forward than the angle of the ankle.
Yeah, exactly. So if you see this, yes, the person is right. That system does not work. And if it does not work, if it's not tensed, if it's because nature has made this, I'm not responsible. Saying that there are parts intended by nature to be more or less tensed all the time.
Oh, here
you have one. You have one there. Yeah, it's not with a very, very little muscle like this that you're going to change anything. No, the first condition is geometry. It's lengthening. Yeah. That's why you understand why I translated position of mechanical advantage into geometry of mechanical advantage.
The first condition, actually, you're right. It's we can agree, and now more and more people can agree that it is the geometry. And the first condition is what you spoke about before, which was to start having the concrete tools to do experiments and to have that dialogue that brings about the geometry.
Yeah. Yes, because that's very important, is that geometry can be verbalized. Feelings, you can't describe feelings to another person. It's your own. It's subjective, You cannot teach somebody to feel in a certain way. Well, you can make her adopt a position so many times that position will become part of her normal feelings. But it's a very lengthy process. It's not teaching this. It's drill. It's imprinting the sensory system. No. We want something much faster. When you see this picture and you start to understand that, yes, you can direct a movement of the back. That movement of the back will do something. Of course, it will rotate the front of the pelvis backward and upward. It will tense the fascia lata. The fascia lata is the long greenish band. Yeah, and that has two actions, which is very interesting to have in mind. Is that instead of thinking of the muscle as a system that only acts by shortening, by pulling things toward one another, pulling the extremity toward one another. There is another function of the muscle that most people have forgotten, is that like a muscle can act exactly like a fascia. If you slightly contract the muscle of the front of the thigh, I mean, slightly contract means that if a teacher had the hands on my leg, it would not feel it. Yes? So it's very, very slight. But still, the muscle is active. If the muscle is active and I start to create movements, to give decision, to have some movement happen so that the ankle and the superior part of the front of the pelvis are going away from one another, the muscle is going to resist the movement. It's going to expand, yes. And we know that when a muscle is resisting in expansion, is 5 times stronger than the same muscle acting in contraction. So yes, there is a very, very important mechanical advantage. So when I look at a teacher that is bending with the back shortened and the protruding abdomen, the picture I show you earlier, it's not an attack. It's not, well, look, she doesn't know how to lengthen her back. No, it's what a miss. What a shame. She was not taught properly by her own teacher. It's not her fault. It's the problem of the teacher. And the teacher, in her case, was Alexander. How could Alexander let go with that?
So these are some of the conversations. I remember asking you, how could he do it? Why did he do that? You know, and asking that same question. And now I think of it, wow, fantastic. Now it's a teacher, you know, it's what some people call the teachable moment, is to be able to grow eyes or grow visual understanding and be able to see the differences in relation to the pictures that you showed throughout this, I could almost call it a seminar, between what the students who, when Alexander was alive, were doing, and then what the teacher is doing when he's taking the Michael Frederick's head on the table. So so it's almost maybe a blessing that Alexander wasn't able to complete a system, because it remains to be expanded and injected into. So there's another way of looking at it, I suppose.
Yeah.
I think you would agree, yeah.
So there is something, is that there are tendons, there are fascias, there are these elastic and really reinforced sheaths of tissues. And there is so much to say about it that I think we could make an interview just about that. For example, I am showing at the moment
one picture,
that one picture. It's a very important one for our work. Everything is more or less related to it in our way of working. That's what we call the thoracolumbar fascia. So the thoracolumbar fascia is immense. It starts from the back of the pelvis. It's attached to the sacrum. It's attached also to the vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae, and the thoracic vertebrae. And it relates also to the top part of the torso. And all the muscles are not acting on the bone; they're acting on this fascia. And so you must imagine what difference it makes to be able to lengthen and widen the back, because suddenly, instead of having muscles do the work for standing, for sitting, for bending, suddenly the work is done by a structure that cannot tire. There is no fatigue. When you employ the correct geometry, it cannot fatigue. It can only fatigue if you start, for example, you see, I don't know much of yoga, but I've seen a few postures, and I see that very often when they want to lengthen a part, they achieve it by collapsing the other side. It's not at all what Alexander had in mind. When you see him bending, or his pupils bend, you will see that he keeps the length at the front and the back. And when that is happening, then the structure is really working at its best. So your mind can be directed towards something else. In the way we work, I ask the people to create a geometry using muscles, using movements, using anything you want. And this is timed. I want the pupil to be very clear that they are starting to organize, to adjust, to give consent to movement and to refuse to give consent to movement at a very, very precise moment in time. That's the only way it can be conscious. Because if you start something or if you do something all day, well, you cannot say it's conscious. To say it's conscious, you have to be very clear that you know when it starts and when it stops. So when the person starts, in 2 seconds, she's able to create the organization. And then that organization is sustained by the fascias and not by the muscles. There have been many scientific experiments. The muscles, we say, are silent, meaning that the person is bending forward with the weight of the head of the person, for example, with bending forward with the weight of a chair, if you want, and the muscles at the back are not active. They are not using any metabolic energy. All is done by the elastic structure, which should always be lengthened, because they only produce their effect, their mechanical effect, when they are lengthened. That is why lengthening the stature is so important. But what is important is not saying it. What is important is seeing on video that you're really capable of achieving it.
Yeah, because then we're training the mechanisms associated with the executive function. That almost becomes the instrument that we train when we are working in a timed fashion. So actually, it would be good if you. I want to make sure that you send me some links of the names of the articles that you're talking about, so I can put them in the notes. And when we were talking about yoga before, just more and more, but recently it's been really pivotal to apply this concept of mechanical advantage to my Aikido practice. And you must understand that my Aikido practice, I think I've spoken to you before, it's very, very unlike the Aikido that's taught in Japan. It's very much based on doing experiments that are able to keep the integrity of the mechanism of the torso, so that it's the muscles are silent. Because if the muscles are applying force in an uncoordinated fashion, then your partner will be able to track where you are, and becomes a fight, which is not Aikido. And I hadn't been
and take hold of you.
And take hold of you. So I have very lucky to train in this. I suppose what I would call it very well thought out system of Aikido, where you have about 7 movements that you do very often, and that the timing is extremely important, and the organization is something that our teacher can teach anyone, and he's very happy to teach people who are very advanced, who come from a different place. And what I was going to say is that I have people I trained with who are relentless at making sure my direction follows in the correct manner. And sometimes when I'm just able to execute through that mechanism of remembering multiple actions at the same time, I'm sort of surprised. Oh, that Shihonage worked? Really? Are you sure? They're like, yeah, well, it's fine, it's great, just keep going, and so it's I find that Aikido has become much richer for me through Alexander technique, and vice versa. And one of the important things that I learned about pedagogy through Aikido, which I can think everyone can appreciate and use, is that, for example, when I ask my teacher a question, he thinks about it and he reframes it, and immediately he puts that inquiry to the whole group. And I think that's a fantastic way of growing a group of people who inquire together. And so, and it's great because one of our colleagues videos all the sessions. So there's a lot of learning in there about the accuracy of the practice and how simple it can be. when we are not using the arms in a way that discoordinate the top of the body from the center of power generation.
Yeah.
So it
But
sort of
I
makes
think
sense to what you were saying.
This is the same as what we are doing, and in pedagogy is the same thing. Is that we grow from the questions. Alexander started to ask questions. We need not to follow him in any other way than to continue asking questions. People think that I am overly criticizing the modern Alexander technique. Well, it was not the idea in the first place. In the first place, the idea was to ask questions and to find answers and to create more interesting questions. But I found that it was very difficult in this environment that was created by the societies to ask questions, just to ask questions. So criticism can be interesting as long as you create something out of it. And that's what we're doing. That's why we're doing these interviews together. I'm afraid I must go now.
Thank you so much, Jeando.
You're welcome.
I look forward to hearing more of your work. I think you're doing some workshop for some teachers who are coming to you in Ireland. So you're available for teaching. I'm available for teaching. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this and these videos and creating it into smaller segments and sharing it in various other places in social media. I think the topics that we've covered, well, it's been very enlivening for me. It's a bit late here in Melbourne, but it's been fantastic to speak with you. All right, Jeando.
A great pleasure.